says the Lord, the God of hosts, the Lord. In all your little towns there shall be wailing, and in all the streets they shall cry. They shall call the farmers to mourning. I will pass through the midst of you. I take no delight in the noise of your solemn assemblies.
Hey, welcome to Presbycast. It's the Resbin in Memphis edition. Although I'm not there. I guess you could say I'm there in spirit. And I will comment from the clouds when I feel appropriate. Because I haven't really watched a whole lot. I've just been following the little that I've seen on Twitter. But Presbyterian Chortles Weekly, Presbycast, wrapping up one of the days of PCA General Assembly. Great to get on here.
The last day.
Okay.
Yep. Well, we have a special guest. I invited him. He didn't text me back because he's a very busy man. We've got Mel Duncan with us again. And I didn't know you could be on the show without John Payne.
Well,
I
for you, Brad, and the opportunity to be in the Presbycast penthouse studios high above Memphis was just too good to pass up.
Well, first of all, let's just say, were you surprised that we ended today at 3:47 p.m.?
I was and I wasn't. I certainly was. I didn't expect it. And yet, with Fred Greco and a good Overtures chairman, Steve Dowling, and the good debate, when committees do their job, assemblies do their jobs, and we had overwhelming consensus-type overtures. And while we had some good debate on some things, when it started to flow, it flew very smoothly.
Yeah, it really did. And at one point, I thought we might be done very early in the afternoon.
Yeah.
And was thinking I might be driving home tonight. But
do you remember you had a guest on Presbycast a few weeks ago who predicted that there might be an overture that would generate some debate? And what do you know? The issue of non-Christians testifying in a church court case poked a philosophical bone. It also touched one of the PCA's most critical debates right now, stemming from the DASA report, as well as just the novelty of rolling open a part of the BCO that people have probably never thought about before, and that got us going a little bit.
So, our BCO, as it presently is and always has been, and it's going to remain that way because the overture to change it was not successful.
Right.
Do you know it basically says that an atheist, someone who doesn't believe in God, is not a qualified witness. Right. Do you know the history of that?
Well,
because the ARP, they said, doesn't have that, for instance. I don't know about the OPC.
Yeah, I don't know about the OPC either. I know the principle is found in English common law. I think Dr. James Bruce on the floor talked about how that there are a number of states in the country, South Carolina is one of them, blessedly, that to be an elected official, you have to declare a belief in the idea of God or a higher power. And it stems from a medieval notion of God and truth, and the idea that if you're going to serve or take part in society in such a way, you need to acknowledge the presence of God. And I think it's something that would have been very ordinary to a lot of people and in a lot of church conversations. I think it probably is an artifact of the old PCUS that never got abridged or amended, that frankly has never come up, to my knowledge, in the history of the church until today. And wow, did we get a lesson in the meaning of vows and oaths, and as well as some good discussion about the role of civil courts and the roles of church court, a conversation that you're love to talk about. And I thought it was good stuff today. I thought it was good conversation, good debate.
Yeah, there were good arguments on both sides.
Yeah, really were.
And I didn't have strong feelings going into it, but since then, in the hours since, I've tried to become more sympathetic to those who feel really strongly about this. You know, that this shouldn't be in there.
Yeah.
And I'm a little more sympathetic now, but I think it's all. I don't know what you call this. There are things in our order that seem a little old-fashioned, but it's almost like sometimes I want to keep them just because they're old-fashioned.
Yeah, I lean that way too, Brad.
I thought you might.
Well, I do. In the discussion, and folks, I would encourage to go back and watch the Vimeo live stream of the debate, and it would be the let's see here, it's day 3, so it'd be the Thursday Vimeo live stream. Rick Phillips, my pastor, got to the heart of it right at the beginning of the debate, and I thought he asked a good, provocative leading question, and that is, are there items of discovery that could be entered into a church case that would be factual in nature that wouldn't necessarily depend upon an atheist testifying? And I think that was the raw emotional discussion behind it. The broad philosophical question, though, which interestingly for the PCA we spent most of our time talking about, was what generated a lot of heat. You know, I had this theory, Brad, about GAs, is that you've got to have one big blow up at every GA. And it almost felt like that was the big blow up this year.
Yeah, and some other things that you thought might be were not.
Yeah. Yeah, the sexuality overtures that we've spent, how many years now have we spent, at least 4 General Assemblies we've spent suggesting these. It actually seemed to be a remarkable consensus on the Mississippi Valley Overture. So,
which had to do with self-description, and
right.
It scratches some of the itches that the other unsuccessful overtures, and of course, this one still would have to pass the presbyteries.
Yeah.
But I think part of the appeal of it, and let me know what you think about this, even some of those that might have outward-facing reservations may think, well, this is the last one.
Yeah.
If we pass this one, we're through with this.
You know, Brad, you've been in the PCA long enough to know that you never say never on a subject matter. To me, it feels like it may be the last one. It feels like, from the perspective of someone who wanted the PCA to strengthen our standards, to toughen the BCO up, it felt like the other side, whoever they are, finally understand that we have to do more than we've done. And I was rather pleased with certain voices that ordinarily I see speaking against this, at least not outwardly opposing it. And in private sidebar conversations, I was very encouraged from brothers who ordinarily I don't agree with on anything, saying, Mel, we recognize that we have to do this. So that was an encouragement to me. You know, we've been in a 4-year free fall since Revoice. And there's been, from my point of view, as a confessional guy in the PCA, there's been a frustration that the perceived gatekeepers just don't want to have this conversation. And I feel like, Brad, that this General Assembly may have brought us some resolution on that. And I'm encouraged by that.
I think we might owe old Palmer Robertson a debt of gratitude, because I think his words on Overture 15 last year caused it to come much more near to passage than anyone thought that it would. And I think that moved the window. It shifted it, let's just say, to the right.
When I reported on General Assembly last year to my home congregation, the Second Presbyterian Church of Greenville, I referred to Dr. Robertson speaking as if Elijah the Tishbite emerged from the pages of Scripture and he spoke the truth from the holy mountain. It was just so incredibly important what he did. And he's such a unique voice. I mean, this is a man who has taught at all the seminaries that serve the PCA, who goes back to day one, who understands the PCA's history. And I think you're right. I think Palmer's presentation last year helped the PCA recognize we've got to do more than we've done on this.
Yeah, and he was there this year. I didn't ever get a chance to speak to him.
He did a seminar. He took your slot in the seminar panel.
I saw that,
this year, and was amazing. people from
he had
my
a Bible in his hand.
He did, and he's very special. As I mentioned on your podcast a few weeks ago, we've got to enjoy Palmer while we have him because he is so special to the history of our church.
Yeah, so I don't know, probably no, at no other time in the history of the PCA has someone sort of reemerged from the past like that.
That's interesting.
And I think because of his connection to the early years, it's been more poignant in the last 2 years, approaching the 50th.
Yeah.
All right, so that was the overture that you prophetically.
I thought it would surprise us.
Yeah, and it did. So you never know.
Yeah.
So there was very little discussion on the overture 23, which is how basically says if you describe. I mean, the implication is if you call yourself or identify.
All rise. The ladies have arrived.
Oh, okay. He's a gentleman. Well, there'll be another one after.
Well, we'll rise for her too.
So the other surprise is that
So we are doing live radio.
the Presbygirls are here. One of them, and there's Mr. Zoe. I actually called him, but that's a joke. So Zoe, if you and Seth will take a seat there on the that thing, whatever that is. Seth, grab that mic and put it over between you two. But and angle it down just a little bit. All right. So
now the writer that your lawyer sent to me said that I am not allowed to speak over Zoe during the broadcast. Is that correct? That
you could try.
Okay. All right.
You have won that battle.
Wow. This is just Zoe roast hour, right?
No,
here.
it's Zoe. It's pro Zoe hour, and I'm delighted to hear what the Presbygirls thought about GA this year. We were just talking about the week. I wrote a couple of notes down before I came up. First off, Brad, I thought you had played a joke on me because my side of the hotel only has 14 stories. And so when I got to the top, I said, "Brad, come on."
That's why I said South Tower.
Well, and then I remembered you did indeed say South Tower. So I had to figure out how to transit from the north to the south, which is very PCA.
Were there any statues of
here I
Mao
am.
in this hotel?
Yeah, Resby asked if there were any statues of Mao or Gandhi.
There were no statues of Gandhi
We had that in Dallas.
Did you?
Yes.
in the atrium of the hotel.
Yeah. And there was a painting of Mao that you had to walk back past to
Right.
get to
Right.
the hall.
Right.
Why would Ron DeSantis do this?
Well, we were late partially because we didn't know where to go.
Right.
We figured it out eventually, but we also bumped into Dr. and Mrs. Robertson
How about
on our
that?
way out here.
How about that?
Yeah.
We were just talking about them.
Really?
Palmer and Joanna are a treasure to the PCA.
Amen.
We were just talking about how he's reemerged as a beloved father figure after being in Africa for all those years, and it's been fun to hear his words.
So I think I would just like for Mel and Zoe to interview each other. I think that
Well, my takeaway, Zoe, is that what you saw today was the spirit of 1973. You saw some very PCA things emerge in the General Assembly discussion and debate, themes that have always been a part of the PCA. The idea of committee of commissioners, something probably is a Morton Smith, Bob Canada conversation, maybe a Frank Barker conversation where we're going to have every agency and committee of the PCA be reviewed at General Assembly. And you saw committee of commissioners asking some tough questions. And in some cases, challenging the action of our permanent committees and agencies. You saw the emergence of young voices this year. You think about Jacob Gerber and Scott Edberg, old spreadsheets, and a Matt Fender, and you gotta love Ryan and Ryan Bizet. And
well, you don't have to, but it's easier to get along with.
well,
them if
we
you do.
love Ryan, and I think that bodes well. I'm always struck by how many smart people there are in the room.
How about the young man from Mississippi?
The young man from Mississippi did very well, I thought.
That he's delightful. I don't remember his name, but
Yeah.
everyone will know if they watched.
Yeah.
And
He called the question last year
oh,
for
did he?
Overture 15.
Okay.
Yeah, he had a great moment.
He's very at ease with himself. He can make fun of himself if he needs to.
A skill that is undervalued today by a large margin.
Well-
Yeah, I think you saw that this week. I think you can't take yourself seriously when you're presenting an argument to the assembly. I think the assembly wants its speakers to have a level of competency and understanding, but they also want someone who can be humble. And I think you saw some really good speeches this week that illustrated that, and a few that didn't illustrate that. But yeah, I love the young voices. Brad, you're a big part of that. You've gotten a lot of people excited about the nuts and bolts of Presbyterianism.
Mostly the nuts.
Well,
Well, that's why he hired me.
no. I think assemblies like this year are special. It's an anniversary assembly, so there was a lot of reminiscing. The Susan Hunt video today just really, it was just beautiful. Here is a godly woman in the flower of her beautiful womanhood who has lived a life faithfully, shaping children's ministry. How many of us have the same kind of story that Susan does? We show up for a church meeting, someone presents an important need, she had a conviction, I want to help serve, I don't exactly know how, and she has spent a lifetime helping children know their Savior better. And many other testimonies like that were just super encouraging.
Well, back to humor and
Yeah.
not really taking yourself too seriously. That would apply to Fred Greco as well, because he kept us. Everybody laughed at Fred's jokes,
Yeah.
and everyone loved it. The few times he was wrong,
Yeah.
and was corrected, because he's that guy, you know.
The moment at the end of debate this afternoon where someone wants to call the question and there's 30 seconds left on the clock. Did you see that?
Yes, and he talked out the rest of the time.
And he filled the time, because if they called the question and didn't get 2/3, then it would create another dilemma. And Fred was masterful. Fred has quietly and patiently, it's a lesson for all of us who want to serve, has quietly and patiently done what to some may be hard work, but for him is easy work, which is organized meetings, organized debate. He's so good at that. He's so direct. There's no nuance with Fred. That's why we love him. And yet he does it with a good cheer. Love Fred Greco.
Well, there's a guy in my church who was a member of the church in Ohio where Fred served as a ruling elder.
Okay.
And Fred was his first PCA ruling elder.
Right.
So
right.
I know he really was one. It's
Right.
not just a lesson. I
Right.
have a witness.
Right.
So
Way to set the bar high for the rest of the ruling elders, huh?
Right. Right.
Yes. We
Indeed.
could call him the ruling teaching elder, because he's been both. All right. So the other overture that was not controversial, which I thought would be, was Overture 26 about ecclesial titles. Now,
Yeah.
a couple of words were paired off of it, which I thought would be the connected to, but it basically says that if you're not ordained, you shouldn't use the title of ordained office, which pastor, elder, and deacon are. So, my question for you, Mel, because you've been around longer, why do we value ordination so little, seemingly, and why do we so little understand it?
Well, the first question is easier to answer. I think there's a good and a bad reason. I think the good reason is the PCA has a very high commitment, belief, culture of priesthood of all believers. And I actually think that's a good thing, that we're not trying to clericalize. I mean, you're one of the better anti-clericalists I know in my circles. We don't want to hierarchicalize the PCA. We don't want to create these extra plenipotentiary kind of roles. And so I think that's actually a good tendency that comes out of maybe the evangelical bread and butter of the PCA DNA. I think the other reason, I mean, I don't want to speculate. I don't want to judge people's motives, but I do know that there is a desire to try to get as many people involved, and I'm not against that. I think the reality. I am a church administrator for a medium-sized PCA church, and if you talk to anyone involved in ministry, you know that it is almost always to get ladies who love the Lord more involved, plugged in, active than it is for men. And sometimes that's a result of a culture problem in a church. We like to joke at Second Pres Greenville that men's ministry is becoming an officer. And we try to promote a high expectation that if you want to serve, the best way as a man to do that is to be a deacon or an elder. And while every elder doesn't need to be a deacon before he becomes an elder, it doesn't hurt. I mean, service is a universal principle of Christianity. I think in the case of the PCA, I don't know, Brad. I mean, I don't want to.
There's not a lot of, but just what it is and what it means. There's not a lot of teaching on ordination. You know, my pastor did a sermon on the vows several years ago, and it's had tens of thousands of downloads because all these students, they go looking for it, and nobody else has ever preached a sermon on vows, hardly. So I think ordination is kind of the same way. It's kind of a forgotten or misunderstood thing.
I also think that the PCA has an eclectic culture. Oh, yeah. And I'm a member, a covenant child of a 131-year-old church. And there's an officer board on the wall, and there's an expectation that a father and a son are going to have a certain kind of role in the church. And I think a lot of PCA churches are more transient and are less rooted and are less connected to the Presbyterian story. And frankly, the jargon that's very normal to us is very alien to them. Which is one of the reasons why I love Presbycast, because I think you introduce to a lot of people basic PCA jargon that really everybody ought to know. But honestly, what happened it was 26, right?
Yes.
That's rather historic. I mean, that kind of overture has failed over and over again. And I think it passed this time because this is a General Assembly that is deeply rooted in PCA-edness. And I think a lot of people came here with a love and a historical understanding of that.
And, you know, to be honest, that the SJC case, the Review of Presbytery Records case that got referred straight to the SJC, right, which you can't comment on.
Which a matter pending or impending.
But it reminded everybody that this has real-world connections.
Yeah.
Well, that's that was surprising. It may have an uphill climb in the presbyteries. But we'll see. We'll see. It may be, things don't always just go downhill. Things can be corrected, and people can change.
Well, I mean, and it's true for us too, right? I think in the revoice discussion the last few years, my sense is someone who very much wanted to talk about that theologically with my progressive friends in the PCA, who I know disagreed with it. They didn't even want to talk with me about it. And I think the couple of years in a row of principled arguments being made in an honorable way has made the PCA deal with this. Now, maybe I'm being overly rosy, but maybe the same thing can happen on what may be a complementary and egalitarian problem in the PCA as well.
Yeah, I didn't speak to 26 because, well, for one thing, Steve Tipton stood up and said it better than anyone else could.
Steve's another wonderful voice.
Yes.
Every time he gets up, I'm going to learn something from Steve.
Yeah. But, I mean, what I would have said had I spoken to that was, we're all about orthodoxy, and less so, but still we realize orthopraxy is important, but we need orthopolity, too. And that really is what binds us together.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd like to hear your thoughts on whether an ethos binds a denomination together, or if, our polity binds us together. And if the latter's true, that's an important overture.
Zoe, what do you think about all that? Here I am, the man talking about this. Tell us your perspective on that.
Well, you've been around a lot longer than me. No disrespect. No, I'm just kidding. You've been.
It's called math. You don't have to apologize for
Oh,
it.
okay. Thank you
It's
for telling me
called
what I should think about
melsplaining?
math, Brad.
You all can't hear it, but Resby said it's male-splaining.
Mel's plate. Well, there's a whole group of people who need to do that. So.
And more power to you. One of the interesting things that I've been hearing about, especially the women officers overture, Sarah and Sean and our friend Steven Spinnenweber, and I did a podcast last week just sort of fleshing that out.
Yeah.
There's some internet debates that, we didn't get into naming names, partially because to a certain extent that just sort of promotes a level of back and forth online.
Yeah,
It's just,
yeah.
it's kind of
Unhelpful.
just a death spiral
Yeah.
of nonsense
Right.
that you can get into.
Right.
But we were talking about the fact that for some reason, there is this spirit that seems to think that the only way to properly serve is if you get recognition for doing that. And when I think about the service of the women in my church, our children's ministry director is a wonderful lady. Love her very much. And she's just the warmest, kindest woman. And my church, Redeemer, down in Dallas, they hardly ever have trouble finding volunteers for children's ministry. But I think the spirit of that is just the spirit of our mothers in the church that sort of witness this, just gentle service that doesn't demand any kind of recognition in return. So it kind of seems to me like there's this equation of service and titles, and I think that should be separated in a way, because there's just general Christian service. Christian the qualifications for elder and deacons in is it 2 Timothy? Paul also says that those are the same character qualifications that every Christian should aspire to.
Yeah.
So, we should absolutely hold our elders to high standards, but we should hold ourselves to high standards as well, not with the expectation that we're going to receive something in return for it.
That's interesting.
Well-
How would you riff on that, Brad, the title's expectation for service?
Well, we live in an age of credentialism.
Yeah.
I know someone who used to be a bank manager, and he found that if an employee was unhappy and wanted a raise, you could just make up a title for them, and then they were happy, and the problem went away. I won't say who had this career, but we live in an area. This may offend some people, but upward basketball. Everybody gets a trophy, no fouls. Everybody cheers for everybody. So that can turn into everybody needs a title. Everybody needs recognition. At some churches, it's everybody has to be up front on the stage at sometimes. And there are people who are offended by the fact that in some churches, the only person up front on the stage or behind the pulpit, there's only one or two people in the
Brad,
course.
do you think because churches don't have, by and large, Sunday night churches and prayer meetings, and some don't even have fixed traditional Sunday schools, that because there's just one event a year, one event a week, that there's added pressure to kind of show different people up front?
Oh yeah, I'd never thought about it that way, but we have talked about the rarity of Sunday night worship services, and yes, when the small groups, which a lot of churches have, maybe they atomize the church in a way that everything needs to be brought together on Sunday. No, that's very astute, and I never thought of it that way. But I think people are just used to, we live in an egalitarian culture, and many women work, Sometimes, the women have, higher degrees than the men, and if they've got a title at work and are, most workplaces are completely egalitarian. Some people have a hard time changing gears and thinking, well, that the church is different, but we need to emphasize that the church is different, and we shouldn't be surprised or shocked by that. But it helps to teach. Every Presbyterian pastor and elder should explain Presbyterianism and extol its virtues for the sheep, because really it does protect ministers from congregations, but it protects congregates from officers, from having anybody imposed upon them. And that's one of the things with titles and unordained people. Those people are generally not elected. They're not under any formal oversight except that of a regular church member. And it's sort of like an imposed minister almost, somebody with great power. They may be a great person, and many people can handle that, and it's all good. But there's an accountability. Most people don't realize how, a congregation, if an officer becomes unacceptable to them for any reason, they can vote them out. I mean, that doesn't happen very much, but it's actually quite easy if you look at the process. Just like it's really easy to leave the PCA.
And yet that almost never happens because most churches rotate their leadership. And again, that would be an example of where I'm part of a church that has life elders. And when we do things, we tend to do it once. And I do think a lot of PCA churches are they just roll over constantly. And I think that kind of principle may be wholly alien to a lot of PCA people.
Yeah, I think there are pastors and elders who are principally convinced of life eldership and continual service. And of course, we always relieve people of active service if they have a life event or a family event that affects them. Mel's going to stand up again.
Got to stand up again. All right.
Here comes the other Presby girl and her +1, as I said earlier, and come on in here. You take the couch. Why don't you? But you'll have to lean over towards Mel when you speak. Now, you're not very loud or anything, so All right.
I'll make myself heard.
All right. Well, so now, you all can snuggle up because you're married. It's okay.
We know each other.
Yeah.
We're allowed to touch each other in public? I didn't know that was allowed.
That's after the first 3 years of marriage.
Oh, okay.
We've got
Don't get
12
ahead
under
of
our
yourself.
belt.
As the senior couple in the room, we trust
Oh,
your
don't call me a senior.
judgments.
Well, if you're willing, slip that on, and you'll be able to hear Resby then too. That's the Sean Morris microphone. He usually wears that. Let me bring you up.
Do you want to hear Resby, though? That's the question.
Well,
I want to see Resby.
I'm sorry.
Resby, your name's being invoked here.
I know.
So you're on with Mel. Do you have any questions for Mel?
No.
But if any occur, you're wired in now.
All right.
Okay,
So,
good.
Resby, remember, no one else can hear you. Just me and older Duncan.
So really, this is the Resby Science Theater 3000 episode. I can just
It is.
lob comments over the bow. Here's
they
the
can't hear
idea. Okay, so I'm putting forth a motion. I need you to voice it forward to everybody. I just want to comment on things as they're happening live. I don't want you to say anything to anybody in the room, and we just put the episode out as normal.
I'm not going to mute you, so you do whatever you need to do. So, now we haven't heard from you at all, Seth. So, was this your second GA?
Second GA.
All right, and tell us what happened at the last GA. Why was
Well,
it significant for you personally? You met
I
someone.
came with many nerves and trepidation to meet the online girlfriend. And we met at GA 1 year ago.
Yes, 1 year ago, roughly.
And did Presbycast have anything to do with getting you together?
I would say Presbycast was the cause of all of this.
Wow.
whether they like it or not.
Some would say liability. Is that fair?
That's right. That's very fair, Sean. It's more than fair.
It's more
actually.
than. I like to be overly fair in my description of things.
Maybe you should be moderator next year.
No. I need at least 37 more years experience before I feel comfortable with that.
That's fair.
Well, nobody wants to be moderator next year because it's going to be a hard act to follow.
I agree
poor
with
guy.
that.
Yes, that's
I
right.
agree with that.
Although
Who's-
the expectations are different for a ruling elder than they are for a teaching elder generally.
Yeah.
But we're thankful for that. So, Sean, your thoughts on the day? We've talked about the 3 items, which were some of them were oddly controversial and
Right.
some were oddly uncontroversial.
Right.
But-
Yeah, that was. I'll say it in 6-7 words, but I was surprised at the items that I thought were going to be controversial, where there was relatively little debate or discussion, and the votes were not, for most of those things, were not close at all. I was pleasantly surprised with the amount of accord we had as a body. And then the one item that had the most discussion and extended debate and was more of a close vote, I thought it would be. I was surprised that it was the most controversial. So that just, you never know. You never know coming into these things how those will play out. But I just thought Fred was a tremendous, tremendous moderator. He was so, I know him, so I'm sure I'm biased, but I just thought he was incredibly fair, incredibly professional. The man knows his BCO and his RAO, forward and backward. And
Though Bob Mattis did get him on
That's
that
true.
one point.
That's true, on that one point.
That was the one moment where the kryptonite broke through.
that's right. And
Love that guy.
I thought it was a humorous and historic.
that'll sustain the Facebook page for 6 months.
for 6 months easily. I'm going to get a lot of
that's
mileage
going
out
to
of
be a
that.
cover photo.
Easily.
There's going to be a transcript. So
I thought it was both a humorous and historic moment when, our previous moderator, John Bice, came forward attempting to call the question
Right.
and just slipped his mind that because he's on overtures, he wasn't trying to participate in debate, but he can't even do that much. And so
Yeah.
just what a moment where the current moderator had to correct last
Yeah.
year's previous moderator
Yeah.
and in such a moment of good humor too. I thought surely that has to be, I don't know if it's a first, but it has to be fewer than a dozen times in GA history that has happened.
It was quite a day. Any thoughts on the prospects for the 2 overtures that would have to go before the presbyteries, which would be 23 and 26, the sexuality overture and the ecclesial titles overture?
Well, just spitballing with a gut instinct, I think there's going to be legwork and persuasion that's going to need to happen at the presbytery level. I do, but I remain optimistic because of the amount of unanimity and agreement we had in overtures and on the floor of GA this week about those overtures. If that gives us any indication as to how these things might play out throughout the presbyteries, and I'm thinking particularly the difference of how that was with the previous iterations of those overtures. They were heavily debated, heavily discussed, heavily argued, lots of disagreement, even at GA when they would get passed. Had a tough time getting through the presbyteries. So maybe this will be a different storyline because there was such accord and agreement here at the GA level. Maybe it'll bode well as they make their way through our 88, 89 presbyteries.
All right, so we should talk about the demographics of the overture. Once again, we've so 2 years for the 2019 and 2021, we had 25% ruling elders, which was better than the previous decade, which was around 22. But
I think we made 30, didn't we?
yes, this year.
Yeah.
Last year was
Yeah.
31. This year's 30.
Okay.
So, but I didn't know what to expect.
Can we just stop and have a Machen horn? I feel it. I just need it.
Got the button.
There we go. There we go. All right, I'm centered now. Okay.
The spirit is moving.
That's right.
Well.
That's right. Just need to get that.
And Machen was invoked.
Yeah. Oh, I Machen horned you the other night.
Oh, yeah, but today
On the floor.
in debate.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
That's right.
Is
I
Jane
figured that was
Preston
product
Machen
placement
relation?
from you trying to. Well,
Yeah.
there you go.
But I didn't know what to expect from the type of person who would come to the 50th anniversary that
Yeah.
doesn't normally come.
So what I was struck by was how many new people were here. In our GRN luncheon, we were shocked at how many new people were here. And I attribute that to ruling elder involvement. I think people are paying attention. They're following the arguments. And I think people are getting engaged. And some of that, I think, also is post-COVID. I want to re-engage whether that's the church or whatever. I think people want to go back to their first loves, and I think a lot of people want to get plugged back into the PCA. And it also helps that the assemblies in the Southeast. I mean, I think people can get here, and I think all of those things were what caused this to be another big year.
And Memphis, but it's in a weird part of the South. It's in the Mid-South, so it's actually pretty accessible to Texas and the Midwest.
Yeah.
And so I just didn't know what that would do, if anything.
Yeah.
I didn't have any predictions going into this
What's the
assembly.
deal with the pyramid? What is that?
That was the first arena for the Memphis NBA team.
So it's a basketball arena.
No, it
Well,
was.
it used to be.
Yeah.
What is it now?
Bass Pro Shop.
It's a Bass Pro Shop. Really?
So when do we get our robes and go over there to,
There's
give
alligators
to
over there.
give the tribute to, the great bass?
I have to interject since we brought up, because he listens to this podcast from time to time. I enjoyed the wedding rehearsal dinner of James and Missy Ritchie at the restaurant on the top floor of the Bass Pro
Wow.
Shop pyramid about 5-6
Wow.
years ago here in Memphis.
So I got to do my Bass Pro Shop joke. I haven't been over there. But is there a coincidence that the Bass Pro Shop is that close and half the presbyters look like they bought their wardrobe there?
I think not.
I'd like to hear the Presbygirls on that. I'm not sure the +1 should weigh in on that.
We saw some interesting outfits this year, didn't we, Sarah?
Although I don't think I've seen more outlandish. This year was fairly conservative in dress, I think. But what do you think, Sarah?
I said it was fairly tame. It was fairly tame.
Okay.
Was the Memphis
Zoe?
airport as depressing
Last
as
year was
I?
the big year for outfits. We had a lot of things. We had some dreadlocks. We had some 5-inch inseam shorts.
Oh my.
Mustard yellow colored. I saw this year.
This year?
That was an interesting choice.
Wow. Okay.
Somebody had salmon pants.
Oh,
Just
was it-
really feeling, moved to be loud. We saw a lot of seersucker this year, which frankly I would like to see make a comeback. It's perfect. The more I interact with people from the South, the more I understand that their clothing serves more of a function than you'd like to think initially. It's not a heavy, wool suit. I mean, Sean is clearly not that Southern. He's not Southern enough to wear a seersucker suit yet.
Not quite.
But, it's just a light thing. Anyway, just the phenomenon that is seersucker just really impresses me. I can't even explain why,
No,
but I like
you're not
it.
doing a very good job explaining.
I like it, and I think more people should do it.
Okay.
But Zoe, the salmon trousers you observed, were they a PCA presbyter, or was it just Chad Van Dixhorn again?
You know what? That's a great question. I did not see the man's face.
Okay.
No, Chad turned it down this year. There's something about the OPC that prompts their major figures to wear. You've seen it.
Yeah.
Red, salmon, purple
Dwight Yellow.
pants. No, haven't seen that.
I've seen it on Truman. Mustard yellow trousers.
Oh, yeah, I think so. Well, that's the thing in England. There is this mustard yellow country clothing of the gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
Nigel Farage used to wear those. So, yeah, we're off track. So, any question? Now we've been joined by two more of our friends, Job and Stephen. They don't have microphones. Some of that young talent you were talking about.
Yeah.
We didn't mention you as we were going through all the bright lights, Stephen. But you're one, and Job was a Baptist until I hooked him up with a certain Presbyterian preacher who brought him into the PCA.
How about that?
He's a fine guy, Mel. You need to get to know him. But do you all have any questions for Mel? And I'll sort of repeat them. No? Wow, they're speechless.
I've got a question for Mel.
Okay, please.
So, I've heard it argued that the General Assembly inquiring into, and I'm not making a question of substance, so I hope this question is in order. For example, referring an item in the RPR report to the General Assembly directly. I've heard the argument that that is more top-down hierarchy and that we shouldn't be doing that because it's not Presbyterian. But then, sort of in the same vein, I also hear arguments that we should just trust the committees and never question anything that they do. Are these 2 points cohesive?
You've identified the tension.
Yeah, it is a tension.
What do
in
you
it.
think about that?
Well, I think RPR serves a quasi-judicial function. It's more administrative than it is judicial. And at the same time, RPR oftentimes catches things that need to be caught without any comment on whether they caught something or didn't catch something this year. It's actually a useful way for accountability. One of the peculiar things about the PCA is that our founding fathers, I'm not saying they overreacted, but they really didn't want there to be a hierarchical structure, top-downing lower court saying you can't do this, you can't do this. So there are all these safeguards we put in place about how does one group reach into a church or into a presbytery to speak to an issue. And the truth is we are it's called the great deference principle in the BCO. A higher court is so deferential to a lower court that it's very difficult to do church discipline denominationally. And so what you have are two ways to do that. One is you can, I'm going to mansplain here. You can man up and file a complaint. You know, you can say that person's a heretic or that church is scandalous or whatever it is. And that oftentimes is very confrontational and it's ultra nouthetic and it's two swords, fighting. The other way is to do it through the process of review and control. And when a RPR cites an issue or a church, the so-called rogue session or rogue situation, it needs to be extraordinary. It doesn't need to be, what might be a secondary issue to many. And I think in this year's General Assembly, a majority made a convincing case that there's an issue there that the SJC needs to get involved in. So it's one of two ways that matters can be brought to the national denomination.
Yeah, and it's analogous to the cases extraordinary in that we talked about with the humble petition.
13th, yeah.
You don't just do it on every case.
Yeah.
It's got to be something where maybe it's perceived that the presbytery whiffed so badly that we're just not gonna go there, because from your presbytery you can play badminton with
for years on things.
Yes. Yeah, 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
Nobody enjoys that.
Yeah.
So, all right. So what about the humble petition?
You talk about the Evangel Overture.
Yes, and it was to invoking
kind of the Matt Walsh Overture, in a way, sort of
invoking WCF 31.
Yeah.
For the in cases extraordinary, and the case extraordinary here is the transgender craze, especially as regards children. It was not a broad or reckless thing.
I think in the judgment of the General Assembly, that was a case extraordinary because it's just so shockingly ghastly, and there's a sense that the church needs to speak to that. Delighted that there was zero person that I heard, maybe y'all heard, that in any way tried to push back on that. It was just this issue of should we be doing this? It would have been better, perhaps, if the governor of Alabama or a U.S. senator had said, write a letter to Briarwood or to Evangel Presbytery and say, would you tell us your thoughts on this? That would have been a slam dunk case of a case extraordinary, because a person in the civil magistrate would be...
That's one of the triggers mentioned.
It really is. I in a lot of ways, I would have been happier if that had been done. I think it would have been a more convincing case that, the person wants us to respond to this. And but this is so shocking, and the plus in the new moral revolution, there's just something every day that's getting added onto that. I was surprised that there wasn't more of a pushback on that. I mean, usually David Coffin is the one to do that, to articulate that this is not a case extraordinary. And I think the process of trying to out-argue David Coffin often makes a case, because if you didn't do that, you've really made a case at a PCA General Assembly. I was glad we did it.
I was teaching on the 31st chapter of the Confession about 2 months ago, and the overture just come out, and I sort of read it to our Sunday school class. Mm-hmm. And boy, this is not the reason to do it, but the positive reaction of everyone in that room was telling. it felt different. There was
There's not a Sunday school teacher in the PCA confused about Overture 13, for sure.
And I also think no one made this point, but this is not an inherently political issue.
Yeah.
It's been made political
Yeah.
by government.
Yeah.
The government made it political. We didn't make it political.
Yeah.
It's not tax policy.
Yeah.
It's not term limits.
Yeah.
It's something creation level.
Yeah.
So, all right. Any other thoughts from the peanut gallery? Yeah, you're not visible on the feed now because the camera stops there. So you can get as comfortable as you want to. Is what I'm saying. Mel.
I've got a couple questions for Mel, but
Please.
I've spoken a lot already.
No, you do your questions. I have more of a
Oh.
opinionated.
All right. Well, Mel, how long have you been serving on the Committee of Thanks for GA?
Off and on for 20 years.
20 years.
I did my first in 2003. Ligon was the moderator.
Let me explain it. We do it with Presbytery meetings.
Right.
We do it with General Assembly. There's a speech at the end,
Right.
which is saying thank you. You brought a historical dimension to all of it, and you brought a whole 50th anniversary dimension to it. It was really something today, but that's your specialty.
Well, I enjoy doing it. I like talking about that.
Do you
sort
write
of
it out longhand? Do you type it on your computer?
I used to write it out longhand. In 2003, my oldest brother Ligon was the moderator. That was the Pittsburgh General Assembly, and I was paired with a older minister from Alabama named Henry Lewis Smith, and in classic Mel fashion, his wife's uncle knew my granddad, that kind of thing. And we just hit it off and just became great friends. And Henry has written most of the resolution of thanks in the history of the PCA and is just a great lover of history. And he had a formula to it. And the first year I did it, I showed up and did what Mr. Henry Lewis Smith told me to do. And I loved it because he was just an interesting man, had lived an interesting life, and we did it together for about 10 years. And it got to be towards the end, he died a few years ago, it got to be towards the end that he would come to General Assembly. Usually we would just expect to be appointed, and he would start it, and then he would say, Mel, you finish it. And this year, Fred graciously asked me to do it again. And Caleb Cangelosi, a friend of Presbycast, and I were paired together. And so when I met with Caleb, I said, Caleb, I'm going to start it, and you're going to finish it. And I just love it. I love history. I grew up in a history-minded family, and I didn't realize it growing up, but I watched the PCA grow up as I did, and a lot of PCA founding father types came through Greenville, and I didn't really know who they were, but they were at my Sunday dinner table, so I talked to them, and I have some fond memories of watching Atlanta Hawks basketball games with Morton Smith in my den, and
Wow.
and just some interesting life stuff. And so it was something I could do that wasn't all that political, and frankly, kind of, I enjoyed doing. And so I've done, I think, 15 of them now, 14, 15 of them.
But who's counting?
Well,
Definitely not me.
yeah. But I really enjoyed today because I knew it'd be a 50th anniversary, and so it was a lot of fun to do it today.
Well, you already answered my second question, but where do you get the inspiration for doing these? Because I love listening to them. I mean,
Mel's an historian.
That's right. I mean, they come off as sheer poetry, some of these, like a lyrical quality to them.
Well,
I love listening to them every year.
I appreciate that. I don't really know what I'm doing. I'm just trying to make it beautiful. I mean, I'm just trying to put it together. I love local history, and I did this for years in Calvary Presbytery, and we've got some really historic churches. We've got a couple pre-Revolutionary War era churches, and we've got one church in Calvary, historic Fairview, where there's been one family that has been ruling elder for 10 generations. Wow. In the church, and the same family name. I mean, it's just, and that kind of thing is just, you don't find that in a lot of places anymore. And so the other thing about it is I like to try to, I mean, it's going to sound horrible, but I like to try to bring the PCA together, and we fuss and we argue about so much, there's so much good. There's so much shared life. I try to find, even some people and institutions that I may differ profoundly with, some things that I can love on and celebrate. And so it's one little thing I can do. I enjoy doing. Yeah. Thank you for that.
That was a good question, Sean.
Hey.
Yeah. So, any other questions for our de facto PCA historian? Although that's Wayne Sparkman, and he does a fantastic job.
Well, he'll tell you he's the archivist.
Okay.
He doesn't like to be called the historian.
Okay. You may not know this, but in as much as I was at the OPC General Assembly last year, they have something that we probably couldn't do because of our size, but they have awards at the end of the assembly, tongue-in-cheek awards, and one of them is the Jack in the Box Award for whoever stands up and talks too much. We would have several candidates for that. Dominic Aquila told me that he actually started that when he was in the OPC.
Wow.
Now that, there could be different versions of that story. But if you were going to have these humorous awards at the end of the assembly, what would they be? And who would be some repeat winners, do you think? Don't mention Bob Mattis.
Well, the truth is, one of the things happening is a lot of that's changing right now. I mean, at least it seems that way to me. I mean, you think about some of the faces and figures that have gone on to heaven. For people with memories of the PCA in the 70s and 80s, there were certain voices that were heard on every issue. But in the days before the clicker, that was kind of the signal of how you were going to vote, as certain people would stand up and make speeches. But honestly, the lesson of this General Assembly is all the new voices we're hearing. I find it very exciting. I didn't find debate tedious this year. I thought it was scintillating. And the tone was good. Fred kept us between either side of the road, and we never went into the ditch at any point. And I don't know if I would want to. I mean, Bob is beloved as a kind of process curmudgeon. Is that fair? I mean that in the most loving way. And honestly, he didn't do a whole lot this year. He got Fred on that one point of order, which he's going to rightly ride all year long. But I didn't hear a lot of Jack in the Boxes this year.
And to be honest, I was ever so slightly disappointed in Bob's wardrobe choices this year.
It was so conservative.
It was so tame.
Yeah.
There was no Godzilla shirt. There was no Hawaiian shirt. I barely recognized the man.
I mean,
when I first started coming to General Assemblies, it was all about the ties with him. But now it's branched out. Yeah.
Now, my sense, I'm sorry to go back to wardrobe. My sense is that people were dressed more conservatively this year. Did you sense that? Usually it's a little wackier.
It can be, yeah. I thought so. I thought
it seemed more business casual this year. But
I only really saw one offender, but I can't describe his outfit in detail because then he'll know who he is.
yeah, right.
Well, Mel, you always have a suit or a jacket and tie.
Well,
it's a skill to be able to wear it, and it seemed to be natural, and you're not doing this all the time.
Yeah. Well, it's like going to church, and you want to be prepared to work, and I just want to say again, what a great week! It's just been a great week. A lot of ties that were renewed. We've got Spin in the room with us tonight. We had a gathering of former Second Pres people in the PCA. We've got 30 people who are connected to the history of Second Pres who are now ordained ruling or teaching elder in the PCA. And we had, maybe half of them for a picture Tuesday night, and that was just awesome.
Yeah. Stephen,
Spin was an intern at Second while he was at seminary, and all the way back to Wallace Tinsley in the early 70s. And Wallace was the intern when I was 5 years old at Second Pres. Wow. And, that kind of thing is just amazing. And we're talking about seeing Palmer and Joanna Robertson. It's just special things. And but I thought it was a great week. after 3 or 4 years of really intense argument and debate, it was kind of nice to have a General Assembly like we did this year.
It was.
Yeah, it was different. Certainly felt different in some ways, and a lot of the issues we hear about, the votes went our way, and there have been years when that's just not been the
Yeah,
case
yeah.
at all. So the last question.
Yeah.
Is the PCA, is something changed in it? Has something changed in it, do you think? Is there a shift?
Well,
maybe slide.
At our GRN luncheon on Wednesday, John Payne said he's hopeful that there is something of a reformed resurgence going on. I think that. I mean, what do y'all think?
I'm going to turn this towards me. I've been kind of quiet, but it's something I've been thinking about all week, and watching the debate between gentlemen was very encouraging this year, just by the way that the men held themselves and spoke to one another. There wasn't a lot of, we had a few appeals to emotion, but for the most part, it was generally charitable towards each other. And I was seeing, some comments online before General Assembly, and, we all sort of know the notorious quote from a certain someone who wrote a famous book about PCA, him going to the PCA General Assembly and watching all these slovenly pastors, and, we really need to be more of a men, and, we need to have more strength. And I was thinking while I was sitting there and having to be quiet for most of the day, which is hard for me. So I was doing a lot of thinking about, what does Christian strength look like? What does masculine strength look like? And I saw a lot of that this year. I saw a lot of restraint. I saw a lot of patience. I think we sat under excellent preaching all week. It was very interesting, very moving to me to hear and recount stories from younger men about their older mentors. And I think the new exciting voices that y'all are talking about regarding the younger men are here, and they are exciting because older men have poured so much time into them. And that is the most encouraging thing to me. I think watching John talk about Harry, hearing Ligon talk about, Harry and Tim and Steve and the Nashville school, listening to Spin recall a lot of really good and moving stories about his professors at lunch.
That was at the Green Bull.
It was a Green Bull lunch.
Yeah, I saw a picture. I wasn't there.
He did okay.
It was tremendous.
It was tremendous. And it was very, watching a dad bring his teenage daughter to General Assembly and
Yeah.
slowly explaining everything, especially on issues like Overture 13 and Overture 26, of these are the nuances. This is what's going on. Nobody hates each other, but this is what we're talking about. And Lig did a really good job of reminding us in the sermon that, strength does not come from in ourselves. We're not going to get biblical strength by going to the gym. I mean, we could all use a few more salads after this week. But, strength comprised merely from human machinations is always going to lack spiritual authority.
Sarah, he drew attention to Cindy Reeder in
Yeah.
the choir. I still get choked up about that.
Yeah, and I mean, even watching
What a picture of Christian womanhood, but Christian strength and honor. And how does she do that? But
listening to Susan Hunt talk
yeah.
about her late husband
Yeah.
and that kind of hope, and just realizing it is not the strength in us that's found, but the immeasurable strength that the gospel gives to us, and that is available to us because of the Holy Spirit. And Ligon did a really good job of reminding us. So I think that is one of the reasons why I'm most encouraged about this, and most encouraged about the next 50 years, is mentoring young men, and then actually being able to see after 50 years a couple generations of that.
It's been a hard year, in the PCA, and I know that there were folks watching, and some of the votes didn't go the way they had hoped, and they're frustrated by that, and I'm not insensitive to that, but on the whole, the past 3 days really did feel very unifying, even when there were sharp disagreements between different parties. It just seemed to be, in light of the heaviness that we've endured the last 6 months, there just seemed to be a lot of fraternal bonds and gratitude for God's kindness to the PCA that was, I hate to sound like a charismatic, but it was almost tangible in the room at various points. And that was healing. I don't know if that's the right word, but it sure was encouraging for the 50th anniversary. It was a good year, a good week.
Well, that's probably a pretty good place to end, now that I think about it. And we've done 3 shows this week, and they've all been about an hour. So that's only 2 shows, really. But still, 2 shows in 1 week is okay.
That's one Rogan per week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One Rogan, yeah.
Gonna have a half Rogan reference.
Yeah. But Mel, it's been a blessing to have you.
Thank you.
And I've wanted to have you on just to talk about PCA history. We should have done that before the assembly, but we've gotten it here, and it's in context and very relevant right now.
Thank
So that's good. Seth, we didn't let you talk much, but sometimes when someone's as happy as you are,
That's right. No complaints over here. All smiles.
it's hard to smile and talk at the same time.
My gun is very small that
Oh,
maybe I shouldn't talk about that.
There's footage out there from our friend Camden Busey of the Millers out and
Okay.
about
Yeah,
on
let's-
scooters,
let's
I
keep
deny
moving.
all allegations.
out and around Memphis
Let's
on
keep
scooters
moving.
this evening.
I would not feel safe on the sidewalk with Zoe on a scooter. That should be a jailable offense.
I don't blame you because I almost just lost
I know.
control like 6 times.
You'd be
It was
totally wipe out.
terrifying.
you grew up in Africa where there are great traffic laws, right?
Yes, the best traffic laws. Some of the most beautiful traffic laws. There's like a single traffic light in the whole country.
Well, now,
I'm not even exaggerating. I'm pretty sure that's it.
now you all can't.
Pretty sure
hear
Africa
Resby.
is a continent, not a country.
Yeah, he says Resby reminds us that Africa's a continent, not a country. Some of our young people think it's a country.
Wait, it's not a country?
It
I
has.
was today years old.
Growing up in the country of Africa as you did your childhood.
So, Resby, any questions for anyone before we wind down? Well, let me let you know how many people we have in the room here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 people in this room.
Including you?
Yes.
Wow.
And Brad, we want to commend you for how presentable the room is.
I cleaned it up
Yeah.
for her.
Well,
Not for her.
Not for me.
Not for you.
well, we all understand our pecking order in this house.
Are we in a Hilton or a Marriott?
We're in a Sheraton.
Which I think is Marriott, isn't
Yeah,
it?
those are Marriotts.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's Resby says yes.
Yeah.
That's a Marriott.
We're in the South Tower,
Yeah.
Ooh.
overlooking Mud Island.
Yeah, the views are pretty good.
Yeah.
There aren't a lot of working ice machines in this hotel,
Yeah.
but I know where one is. So,
Is the Memphis airport as depressing as I remember it?
yeah, it seemed sort of empty. The Memphis airport, Resby asked
Yeah.
about. So,
If it wasn't for FedEx, I can't imagine anyone would fly there.
yeah, it's small airports can be just the best airports or more challenging.
Resby does ask about the important issues, doesn't he?
Yeah, yeah. Sean says you ask about the important things.
No, I don't.
So, well, if you'll thank everyone and tell them good night, I think we'll play our General Assembly song from the Crazy Lutheran John Elvasager. I take no delight in the noise of your solemn assemblies, but we have had some delight this week. So, Presby.
Thank you, everyone, for listening. It's been great. Another General Assembly season, more or less in the books, and so we look forward to getting back to some regular shows. You know where to find us at Presbycast. Doesn't seem like there were a whole lot of instances of this, but if you're ever tempted, just remember, don't be an Erdman.
And in all the streets they shall cry. They shall call the farmers to mourning. I will pass through the midst of you. your solemn assemblies. Woe to you who desire the day of the Lord. Why would you have the day of the Lord? It is darkness and not light. Is not the day of the Lord darkness and gloom with no brightness in? I take no delight in the noise of your solemn assemblies. Even though you offer me burnt offerings, I will not accept them, and the peace offerings of your fatted beasts, I will not look upon them. Take away from me the noise of your songs. To the sound of your harps I will not listen. I take no delight in the noise of your solemn assemblies. But let justice roll down and righteousness like ever-flowing streams.
What's wrong with you people?
Yeah, I couldn't get to that. So, I got the computer at my back. So, all right. Do you have any offline comments for? Hold on.
Oh boy.
Oh, I didn't. Now I'm in.
The Presby camp.
So that did go out, Resby. The what's wrong with you people?
It did or did not?
It did.
Oh, yeah, I'm fully aware.
I thought I'd ended it. Hang on. We're almost
Somebody
there.
on this podcast is committed to tradition, unlike the person pressing the buttons.
Well, it says we're still on because it can't connect. So we are still live. Anyone still listening, we're trying to shut this thing down.
Really?
Yeah, Resby, can you end it on your end?
That's the darkest question you've ever asked me.
Well, not completely end it, you know.